Alien king mocks broken daughter, human turns her into a star HFY. What if you were a gritty space drifter, hardened by betrayal and battle scars, stepping into a crystalline alien court for your hard-earned reward, only to have a sneering king thrust his scorned, legless daughter into your arms, her blazing emerald eyes challenging you to defy him and unleash a cosmic fire that could outshine the stars themselves? Today, I'm your cosmic bard from the Sci-Fi Nebula channel, and I'm hurling you into the electrifying depths of Zorynth, a realm of shimmering spires and ruthless ambition, where a rogue human mercenary and a cast-off princess ignite a rebellion of spirit and steel that'll sear through the galaxy. Brace yourself and don't dare look away, because Chapter 5, Rebirth and Revelation, explodes with a jaw-dropping twist, a cybernetic resurrection and a life-altering secret that'll flip everything you thought you knew upside down. Before we rocket into this stellar odyssey, slam that like button and smash subscribe to blast us toward 1,000 subs. Your cheers are the warp drive fueling our wildest tales. Craving a sci-fi saga of your own? Toss your wildest ideas in the comments or drop a 1 if you're already gripped, or a 0 if we need to crank the thrusters. Now, strap in tight, let's plunge into the galaxy's untamed heart and set the stars ablaze. Chapter 1, The Deal Beneath the Crystal Light. I never expected to find an alien girl staring into my soul when I walked into that shimmering crystal hall on Zorynth, her green eyes blazing with fury while her king mocked her as trash, a broken prize thrust into my human hands. I'm Kael Draven, a drifter scraping by on dirty jobs across the galaxy, and I just finished a hellish mission for King Xylaris, expecting a fat stack of Zeridium credits to patch up my battered ship, Stellar Wraith. Instead, I got her. The Grand Hall of Zorynth wasn't like anything I'd seen before. Living pillars twisted upward like veins of some giant beast, pulsing faintly with a violet glow that bounced off my scratched black armor. The air hummed with a strange energy, thick and alive, as if the whole place breathed. I stood there, boots planted firm, facing the throne where Xylaris lounged, his pearlescent skin catching the light like liquid opal. His long, sharp eyes narrowed at me, and his lips curled into a sneer that made my fingers itch for the plasma pistol at my hip. "So, human," he said, his voice scraping like metal on stone, "you want your reward, do you?" I could hear the contempt dripping off every word. I'd spent weeks hunting down a rebel cell in the Zeridium mines, bastards who'd been torching his precious exports. He'd called it a simple task, but my ship's hull was now a mess of plasma burns, and half my crew had bailed after the firefight. I'd earned those credits. 10,000 Zeridium units, I said, keeping my tone flat despite the heat rising in my chest. That was the deal. He laughed, a sharp, echoing sound that bounced off the crystal walls. "Oh, no, no, no. I have something far more valuable." He waved a lazy hand, and from the shadows behind the throne, a figure emerged. My breath caught for a second. She was stunning in a way I hadn't expected, skin a shimmering silver pale, hair black as the void cascading down her back, and those eyes, like twin emeralds blazing with something fierce. She sat in a hovering chair that glowed faintly, its hum barely audible. An alien princess, no doubt, but there was something off about the way Xylaris looked at her. "This is Lirien," he announced, his voice thick with mockery. "My daughter. A defective specimen, sadly. Born with useless legs." He flicked his fingers dismissively toward the chair. "She's yours now, human. Consider it payment in full." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, but before I could process them, Lirien's voice cut through the air. "Father. You can't." Her tone was sharp, almost a blade, but Xylaris silenced her with a single, cold gesture. "I can, and I will," he snapped. "You're a burden to this kingdom, and I've found a way to rid myself of you while settling a debt. Be grateful." I felt my jaw tighten. This wasn't a reward, it was a damn insult. He was tossing her at me like some broken trinket, and the casual cruelty of it made my blood boil. I glanced at Lirien again, and those emerald eyes locked onto mine. There was rage there, sure, but beneath it, something else, humiliation, maybe, or a flicker of fear. She wasn't just a princess, she was a person, and her own father was treating her like garbage. What? I said, my voice low and rough, barely holding back the anger. I came here for credits, not this. I gestured vaguely toward her, not sure what else to say. Xylaris leaned forward, his smile widening. The deal has changed, human. Accept it, or my guards will ensure you leave with nothing. I felt the hum of plasma rifles powering up behind me, a dozen barrels trained on my back. My hand twitched toward my pistol, but I knew I was outnumbered. One wrong move, and I'd be a smear on this pretty crystal floor. I looked at Lirien again, really looked at her this time. Her jaw was set hard, her hands gripping the arms of her chair so tight her knuckles paled. She didn't want this any more than I did, but she wasn't begging or breaking. There was a strength in her, even in this moment of disgrace, that I couldn't ignore. Something about the way Xylaris treated her, his own flesh and blood, twisted a knife in my gut. I'd seen plenty of scum in my years drifting the stars, but this was a new low. Fine, I said at last, forcing the word out through gritted teeth. I'll take her. Xylaris clapped his hands together, delighted. Excellent. Guards, escort them out. And, daughter, he added, turning to Lirien with a sneer, do try not to disappoint your new owner as thoroughly as you've disappointed me. I didn't miss the way her eyes flared at that, a storm of hatred radiating off her in waves. I couldn't blame her, I wasn't exactly thrilled about this arrangement either. As the guards herded us toward the exit, I kept my pace steady, one hand on the back of her chair, though she didn't need me to push it. The weight of what had just happened settled over me like a shroud. I'd come here expecting a simple payout, and now I was tangled in some royal family mess I didn't ask for. The walk to the spaceport was tense. The bustling terminals of Zorynth buzzed around us, traders haggling over Zorynth, pilots shouting at droids, ships roaring to life. I could feel the stares, the whispers, as we passed, a scruffy human mercenary and an alien princess in a hoverchair. We must have looked like a damn odd pair. Lirien didn't say a word, but I could sense her fury simmering, her pride battered but not broken. I kept my mouth shut too, focusing on getting us to Stellar Wraith without trouble. When we reached the ship, its scarred hull loomed ahead, a Nightfang-class relic I'd won in a dice game years back. It wasn't pretty, but it was mine. I punched in the access code, and the ramp hissed open. This is it, I said, glancing at her. Not much to look at, but it'll get us out of here. She maneuvered her chair up the ramp with a deftness that surprised me, like she'd done it 1,000 times. I followed, wondering just how much I'd underestimated her already. Inside, I led her to a small cabin, narrow bunk, a banged-up table, a hygiene unit crammed in the corner. Not a palace, I said, watching her scan the space with those piercing eyes. I don't need a palace, she replied, her voice steady but edged with something bitter. I've had enough of them. I nodded, then leaned against the doorway, crossing my arms. Look, I'm not happy about this either. I came for credits to fix my ship, not to, whatever this is. But we're stuck together for now. I'll figure out a way to get my money and let you go wherever you want. Deal? She stared at me for a long moment, like she was peeling back my skin to see what was underneath. Then, slowly, she nodded. You mean that? She asked, her tone softer, almost testing me. I'm not in the business of keeping prisoners, I said, pushing off the frame. Get some rest. I've got a ship to check. I turned and headed for the engine room, but her eyes stayed with me, burning into my thoughts. I'd dealt with pirates, smugglers, and warlords, but this was different. I didn't know what I'd gotten myself into, but one thing was clear, Lirien wasn't just some broken prize. There was more to her than Xylaris could ever see, and maybe, just maybe, more than I was ready to admit. Chapter 2, Journey Through the Spaceport. I shoved my way through the chaotic sprawl of Zorynth's spaceport, the hoverchair's faint hum trailing behind me as Lirien kept pace. The air buzzed with the clamor of traders barking deals, engines roaring to life, and droids clattering over the cracked metal deck. My boots thudded against the ground, each step heavier than the last, weighed down by the mess I'd just walked out of. King Xylaris had screwed me over, 10,000 Zeridium credits reduced to this alien princess with her emerald eyes and a chip on her shoulder bigger than my ship. I wasn't sure what pissed me off more, his smug face or the fact I'd let myself get roped into this. The crowd parted grudgingly around us, their stares prickling my skin. A human mercenary in battered armor pushing an alien royal in a glowing chair, we were a damn circus act. I caught a few whispers, sharp and curious, but I kept my eyes forward, hand resting on my plasma pistol just in case. Lirien didn't say a word, but I could feel her tension, tight as a coiled spring. Her silver pale hands gripped the chair's controls, knuckles whitening, and I wondered what was going through her head. Was she plotting to bolt the second she got a chance? Or was she just swallowing the humiliation her bastard father had dumped on her? "Slow down," she snapped suddenly, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. I glanced back, surprised. "I can handle this myself." Her tone was steel, no room for argument. I stopped, raising my hands in mock surrender. "Suit yourself, princess." She glared at me, those green eyes could have burned a hole through my skull, then took over, guiding the chair with a precision that made me pause. She wasn't helpless, not by a long shot. I'd pegged her wrong back in that crystal hall, and that realization gnawed at me as I fell into step beside her. The spaceport stretched out like a maze of steel and neon, ships of every make docked in jagged rows. My destination loomed ahead, Stellar Wraith, my beat-up Nightfang-class relic, its hull scarred with plasma burns and patched with whatever scrap I could scrounge. It wasn't much, but it was home. As we approached, Lirien's voice broke the silence again. "This is a Terran Nightfang, isn't it? I thought they were all scrapped after the war." Her words hit me like a stray bolt. I turned, narrowing my eyes. "You know about ships?" She didn't answer, just maneuvered her chair up the ramp as it hissed open, leaving me staring after her. How the hell did a princess locked away in a palace know about decommissioned warships? I punched in the access code and followed her inside, my curiosity itching like a fresh wound. The interior was tight, dim corridors, flickering lights, the faint hum of the ship's system struggling to stay alive. I led her to a small cabin near the bridge, its door creaking as I shoved it open. "Here's your spot," I said, gesturing to the cramped space. A narrow bunk hugged one wall, a banged-up table sat in the corner, and a hygiene unit was jammed beside it, barely enough room to turn around. "Not a palace, but it'll do." She guided her chair inside, scanning the room with those piercing eyes. "I don't need a palace," she said, her voice low, laced with something bitter. "I've had enough of them." I leaned against the doorway, crossing my arms, trying to read her. She wasn't just talking about luxury, she was talking about chains. "Look," I said, keeping my tone even, "I'm not thrilled about this situation either. I came to Zorynth for credits to fix this heap, not to play babysitter. We're stuck together for now, but I'll figure out a way to get my money and cut you loose. You can go wherever you want. Deal?" She stared at me, long and hard, like she was peeling back my armor to see if I was lying. Then, slowly, she nodded. "You mean that?" Her voice softened, testing me, and I caught a flicker of something, hope, maybe, in her eyes. "I'm not in the business of keeping prisoners," I said, pushing off the frame. "Get settled. I've got work to do." I turned and headed for the engine room, but her gaze clung to me like a shadow. I'd dealt with plenty of hard cases in my time, pirates, smugglers, deserters, but Lirien was different. She wasn't just cargo I could offload. There was a fire in her, buried under all that pain, and it was starting to spark something in me I didn't want to name. The engine room was a mess of exposed wires and scorched panels, the aftermath of that damn rebel job. I dropped my toolkit and got to work, losing myself in the familiar grind of repairs. Hours slipped by, the hum of the ship's systems my only company, until Vex's voice crackled through the comms. "Captain, your guest is in distress." My head snapped up, banging against a conduit. "Son of a," I muttered, rubbing the spot as I grabbed a rag and wiped my hands. "What kind of distress?" "She's attempting to transfer from her chair to the bunk," Vex replied, its tone flat. "Vital signs indicate frustration and strain." I hesitated. She'd made it clear she didn't want help, but if she was hurting herself out of sheer stubbornness, I couldn't just sit here. I made my way back to her cabin, boots echoing in the quiet corridors, and stopped dead when I saw her. Lirien was half on, half off the bunk, one arm braced against the wall, the other gripping the chair as it hovered beside her. Sweat beaded on her silver skin, her breathing shallow and ragged. She froze when she saw me, those emerald eyes flashing. "Don't," she started, her voice sharp, but I cut her off, stepping inside. "Don't what?" "Stand here and watch you wear yourself out," I said, keeping my tone firm but not harsh. She glared at me, but her strength was fading, I could see it in the tremble of her arm. "I don't need your pity," she spat, the words laced with venom and something else, shame, maybe. I crouched down to her level, meeting her gaze head-on. "This isn't pity. It's me not wanting to scrape you off the floor later." For a second, we just stared at each other, a silent standoff. Then she sighed, the fight draining out of her, and I took that as my cue. I slid my arms under her, careful, gentle, like she might break if I moved too fast, and lifted her onto the bunk. She was lighter than I expected, her warmth seeping through my gloves, and for a moment, I forgot to breathe. I set her down, stepping back quick to give her space. "There," I said, crossing my arms again. "Was that so bad?" She didn't answer right away, just looked at me, her chest rising and falling as she caught her breath. "I don't need you hovering over me," she said finally, but the edge in her voice was softer now. "I'm not hovering," I shot back. "But I'm not gonna let you kill yourself out of pride either." She blinked, then looked away, her hands smoothing the blanket over her lap. "You don't see me as useless?" she asked, so quiet I almost missed it. The question hit me harder than it should have. I leaned against the wall, choosing my words carefully. "I see you as someone who's survived a hell of a lot more than most. That's not useless." She didn't respond, just stared at the wall, but I could tell my words had landed somewhere deep. I pushed off and headed for the door. "Rest up," I said over my shoulder. "Ship's AI will handle basic stuff, just ask Vex." I stepped out, closing the door behind me, but her face stayed with me, those eyes, that quiet strength. I told her she wasn't useless, and I meant it, but damn if I wasn't starting to wonder what I'd gotten myself into. Back in the engine room, I tried to focus, wrenching at a busted coupling, but my mind kept drifting. Lirien wasn't what I'd expected, not a fragile princess, not a burden. She was something else, something I couldn't quite pin down. And as much as I wanted to keep this strictly business, a part of me, a stupid, reckless part, was already hooked. Chapter 3, Crash in Hyperspace. I was dead asleep in my bunk when the whole damn ship jolted me awake, a shudder so violent it threw me against the wall. Alarms screamed through stellar wraith, red lights flashing like blood pulsing through the corridors. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding, and bolted for the bridge, my boots slamming against the deck as the ship bucked again. "Vex, what the hell's going on?" I barked, sliding into the pilot's seat. The AI's calm voice cut through the chaos. "Critical failure in the auxiliary drive, Captain. Hyperspace stability collapsing." Perfect, just what I needed after Xylaris's stunt. Through the viewport, the swirling colors of hyperspace were fraying, streaks of light twisting into jagged chaos. I gripped the controls, sweat beading on my forehead as I fought to keep us steady. Then I heard it, the soft hum of Lirien's hoverchair. She glided onto the bridge, her silver skin catching the flickering red glow, those emerald eyes sharp and alert despite the hour. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice steady, like she'd walked into a bar fight instead of a ship about to blow. A UX drive shot, I growled, fingers flying over the console. If we don't drop out of hyperspace soon, we're gonna be scattered across half the sector. She didn't flinch, just maneuvered her chair to the co-pilot station and plugged in, her hands moving with a speed that made me blink. Power grids cascading, she said, her tone clipped, focused. We need to force an emergency drop now, or the core'll implode. I shot her a look. You sure you know what you're doing? I've studied systems like this, she replied, not even glancing up. Trust me. Studied them? Where the hell had a princess locked in a palace learned to read a ship's guts? But the ship lurched again, and I didn't have time to argue. Fine, I said, punching in the sequence. Dropping in 3, 2, 1. I yanked the lever, and the universe snapped back into focus. The swirling chaos vanished, replaced by a field of cold, steady stars, but the alarms didn't stop. Status, Vex. I shouted as the ship groaned under me. Life support stable, the AI reported. Main power at 15%. Auxiliary systems failing. I slumped back, exhaling hard, but Lirien was already scanning the sector, her fingers dancing over the readouts. There's a planet in range, she said. Valdor, frontier world. One trading post, low tech, but it's got salvage. I raised an eyebrow. Convenient. Any catch? It's a rough place, she admitted, her eyes meeting mine for the first time since she'd rolled in. Smugglers, fighters, the kind of people who don't ask questions. I smirked despite myself. Sounds like my kind of crowd. Setting course. I adjusted the controls, coaxing what little power we had left into the thrusters. The ship shuddered but obeyed, limping toward Valdor like a wounded beast. The descent was a nightmare. The atmosphere hit us like a fist, flames licking the viewport as I wrestled the stick. Lirien strapped into her chair, her expression calm but her hands tight on the armrests. Hold on, I muttered, more to myself than her, as the ground rushed up to meet us. We didn't so much land as crash, plowing through dirt and scrub in a clearing miles from the trading post. When we finally stopped, the hull creaking in protest, I slumped in my seat, adrenaline still buzzing through me. Well, that could have been worse. Could it? Lirien said, a dry edge to her voice that almost made me laugh. I turned to her, checking for any sign of panic, but she just unstrapped herself, her chair humming back to life. You okay? I asked, genuinely concerned now. I'm fine, she said, running a quick diagnostic on her console. The chair's stabilizers held. Military grade. The ship, though, she trailed off, and I didn't need her to finish. We were grounded until I could scrape together parts and credits. I stood, stretching the ache out of my shoulders. We're not going anywhere without repairs, and I'm fresh out of Zorynth thanks to your dad. Her eyes darkened at the mention of Xylaris, but she didn't bite back. Instead, she leaned forward, her voice low and deliberate. There's a fighting ring in Valdor's underground. I read about it, big purses, no rules. We could use it to fund the fixes. I stared at her, trying to wrap my head around what I'd just heard. You want to fight? In that? I nodded at her chair, not meaning to sound harsh, but it slipped out anyway. She didn't flinch. Not me, she said, her gaze locking onto mine with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. I want you to teach me how. I'm tired of being dead weight. Her words hung there, raw and heavy, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. Dead weight? Is that how she saw herself? I'd spent years dodging plasma bolts and outrunning bounty hunters. Nobody survived that by being weak, and here she was, thinking she was nothing because of those damn legs. You're not dead weight, I said finally, my voice rougher than I intended. You just got us out of hyperspace alive. That's more than most can claim. She blinked, caught off guard, but I pressed on. You want to learn to fight? Fine. We'll start tomorrow. For now, we need to figure out how bad this wreck is. She nodded, a faint spark lighting up those emerald eyes, determination, maybe even a hint of gratitude. I turned back to the console, pulling up damage reports, but my mind was racing. Lirien wasn't just some royal reject, she had a head for tech and a will like iron. I'd seen grunts crack under less pressure than she'd just handled, and she'd done it without breaking a sweat. Who was this woman? We spent the next few hours taking stock. The ship's core was intact, but the thrusters were toast, and half the power relays had fried. Supplies would hold us a couple weeks, and Valdor's air was breathable, small mercies. Lirien worked beside me, pulling up schematics on her console, pointing out weak spots I'd missed. You've got a knack for this, I said, half impressed, half baffled. Where'd you pick it up? Books, she said simply, not looking up. Data logs. Anything I could get my hands on in the palace. It was an escape. Her voice dipped, and I caught the weight behind it, years trapped in that crystal cage, dreaming of something more. I didn't push her further, I knew what it was like to run from a past you couldn't outpace. By the time we finished, the suns were dipping low over Valdor's dusty horizon, casting long shadows through the cracked viewport. I cleared a space in the cargo bay, dragging out some old mats I'd stashed for emergencies. This'll be your training ground, I said, wiping sweat from my brow. Tomorrow, we turn that chair into a weapon. She guided her hover chair over, testing the space, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of excitement in her, a hunger to prove herself. Get some sleep, I told her, heading for my own bunk. You'll need it. She nodded, but as I walked away, I felt her eyes on me again, steady and searching. I flopped onto my cot, staring at the ceiling, my head a tangle of thoughts. Lirien wasn't what I'd signed up for, she was sharp, stubborn, and damn near unbreakable. I'd told her she wasn't dead weight, but the truth was sinking in, she might just be the strongest person I'd ever met. Sleep didn't come easy that night. The crash replayed in my head, the way she jumped in, cool as steel, like she'd been born for it. I'd spent my life drifting, taking jobs, dodging attachments, but now I was tethered to her, whether I liked it or not. And the hell of it was, I didn't hate it. Not one bit. Chapter 4, The Arrival of Maravexis. I stood in the cargo bay of Stellar Wraith, sweat dripping down my neck as I watched Lirien spin her hover chair in a tight arc, the hum of its servos cutting through the still air. Valdor's twin suns blazed outside, their light filtering through the cracked viewport and painting the mats I'd laid out in shades of gold and rust. It had been a day since we'd crashed, and I'd kept my promise. Turning that chair into a weapon was starting to feel less crazy by the minute. She was a natural, her upper body strong from years of hauling herself around, her reflexes sharp enough to make me jealous. But every time my hand brushed her shoulder to adjust her stance, my pulse kicked up a notch, and I had to fight to keep my head in the game. Faster, I said, circling her like a drill sergeant. Use the momentum, let it carry you. She nodded, her black hair whipping around her face as she executed another spin, this time clipping an imaginary target with the chair's edge. Good, I called, grinning despite myself. You're getting it. Her emerald eyes flicked to mine, a spark of pride flashing in them, and damn if that didn't hit me harder than it should have. I was supposed to be teaching her to fight, not staring like some lovesick rookie. That's when I heard the knock, sharp, metallic, echoing through the bay. I froze, hand dropping to my plasma pistol as I turned toward the hatch. Vex, who's out there? I muttered into my comms. Unidentified individual, the AI replied. Organic with cybernetic enhancements. No visible weapons. I glanced at Lirien, who'd stopped her chair mid-spin, her expression wary but curious. Stay put, I told her, moving to the viewport. Outside stood a woman, tall, lean, with a right arm that gleamed silver under the sun, all sleek circuits and polished steel. Her left eye glowed faintly, a cybernetic lens whirring as it focused on the ship. She didn't look like a scavenger, not with tech that advanced. I cracked the hatch, pistol ready but low. "Who are you, and what do you want?" I demanded. "Name's Mara Vexus," she said, her voice crisp, like she was used to being heard. "Cybernetic specialist. Saw your crash yesterday, thought you might need a hand." Her organic eye, a warm brown, shifted past me to Lirien, who'd rolled up behind me despite my warning. "Or maybe more than that," Mara added, her lens zeroing in on Lirien's chair. "I can fix those legs, princess. Not just fix, upgrade. Make you better than new." I stepped forward, blocking her view. "We're not looking for handouts." "What's the catch?" Mara smirked, tilting her head so the sun caught her metal arm. "No catch, just a trade. I need your ship's quantum core to power a project. In return, you get her legs, and I get to scratch a scientific itch." She paused, her lens whirring again. "Plus, I'm curious about you too. Human-alien dynamics, fascinating stuff." My face heated up, and I shot a quick glance at Lirien, who just raised an eyebrow, unfazed. "I'll think about it," she said coolly, her tone giving nothing away. Mara tossed me a data chip, its surface glinting in the light. "My coordinates and creds. Don't wait too long, opportunities like this don't linger on Valdor." She turned and walked off, her cybernetic arm catching the sun as she disappeared into the dusty haze. I shut the hatch, turning the chip over in my hand. "She could be lying," I said, meeting Lirien's gaze. "Could be," she agreed, her voice steady. "But that tech's real. Advanced enough to," she trailed off, her fingers brushing the edge of her chair, and I saw it, the longing in her eyes, the chance to be more than what her father had called her. "Your call," I said softly. "No pressure. But if you want this, I'll back you." She looked at me, those emerald eyes searching mine, and I felt the air between us crackle. "Why?" she asked, almost a whisper. "Why help me?" I stepped closer, my throat tight. "Because you're worth it. More than that bastard king ever saw." Her breath hitched, and for a second, I thought she might pull away. Instead, she nodded. "Contact her. I want this." I sent the signal, and within hours, we were rolling into Mara's underground lab, a marvel of steel and holograms hidden beneath Valdor's surface. She set us up in a corner, Lirien training with her chair while I helped tweak the cybernetic designs. Days blurred into a rhythm, me wrestling with circuits, her pushing her limits, our paths crossing more than I'd planned. Every touch lingered, my hand on her arm as I steadied her, her fingers brushing mine when she handed me a tool. I told myself it was just the job, but the way my chest tightened when she smiled said otherwise. She got stronger fast. Her arms were already solid, but now they moved with a grace that made my breath catch. One evening, after a long session, I watched her drill a move I'd shown her, a quick pivot, a mock strike with the chair's edge. "You're staring," she said, not looking up, a teasing edge in her voice. "Just checking your form," I lied, but the heat in my face gave me away. She rolled closer, her silver skin shimmering under the lab's lights. "Is that all?" I didn't have an answer, or maybe I did, but my brain shorted out as she stopped inches from me. The air felt thick, charged, like the moment before a storm. "Your trouble," I muttered, half to myself, and she laughed, a soft, real sound that hit me like a punch. "You're not wrong," she said, her eyes locked on mine, and damn it, I couldn't look away. It happened fast. 1 second we were talking, the next I was leaning in, or maybe she was, and our lips crashed together. It was fire, electric, like a star igniting in the void. Her hands gripped my shoulders, strong and sure, and I pulled her closer, feeling the warmth of her silver skin through my shirt. Her hair fell around us like a curtain, and when her lips parted, I tasted something sweet, alien, intoxicating. I don't know how long it lasted, seconds, minutes, but when we broke apart, breathless, her eyes were wide, her skin glowing faintly with patterns I hadn't seen before. "Guess Mara's got her data now," I said, voice rough, trying to play it off. Lirien smirked, but her cheeks flushed a deeper silver. "She'll live," she replied, then rolled back a bit, like she needed space to process it too. I ran a hand through my hair, heart hammering. "You okay?" I asked, suddenly unsure. "Better than okay," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I just didn't expect that." "Neither did I admitted, and it was the truth. I'd kissed plenty of women in my time, human, mostly, a few others, but nothing had ever felt like that. Like it meant something bigger than a fleeting rush." I cleared my throat, stepping back. "We should rest. Big days ahead with Mara's plan." She nodded, but as she guided her chair away, her hand brushed mine, deliberate, I was sure, and it sent a jolt through me I couldn't shake. That night, lying in the lab's spare cot, I couldn't sleep. Lirien's face kept flashing in my head, those eyes, that kiss, the way she'd looked at me like I was more than just a hired gun. I'd told her she was worth it, and I'd meant it, but now I was starting to wonder what she saw in me. A drifter with a busted ship and a rap sheet didn't exactly scream, hero. But she'd chosen me to stand by her, and that hit me harder than any plasma bolt ever could. I didn't know where this was going, her legs, the ship, us, but one thing was clear, Lirien wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was a partner, maybe more, and I'd be damned if I let her down. Chapter 5, Rebirth and Revelation. I sat by Lirien's side in Mara's lab, my hand wrapped around hers, the cold steel of the operating table biting into my knees. 3 days, that's how long she'd been out since the surgery, her silver skin pale under the harsh lights, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Mara had promised the cybernetic legs would work, fusing them with Lirien's natural bioenergy, but the weight was killing me. I'd barely slept, barely eaten, just watched her, waiting for those emerald eyes to open. Valdor's suns rose and fell outside, but in here, time dragged like a broken engine. When she finally stirred, I felt it first, her fingers twitching against mine. My head snapped up, heart slamming in my chest. "Lirien?" I said, voice rough from disuse. Her eyes fluttered open, green and bright, locking onto me with a clarity that stole my breath. "Kael," she whispered, her voice hoarse but alive, and I squeezed her hand tighter, relief flooding through me like a shot of adrenaline. "Welcome back," I managed, grinning despite the ache in my jaw. Mara bustled over, her cybernetic eye whirring as she scanned Lirien's vitals. "How do you feel?" she asked, all business. Lirien shifted, wincing slightly. "Different," she said, her gaze dropping to her legs, sleek, metallic, glowing faintly with the same silvery light that pulsed in her skin. "Complete." Her voice cracked on that last word, and I saw the wonder in her eyes, the disbelief. I couldn't imagine what it was like, feeling something you'd never had before. "Try moving them," Mara urged, stepping back. Lirien's brow furrowed, and I held my breath as the cybernetic limbs responded. They flexed, slow at first, then smoother, the glow intensifying with each motion. Patterns of light rippled across them, matching the faint shimmer in her skin, a dance of energy I couldn't look away from. "Remarkable," Mara muttered, tapping at her hollow pad. "The bioluminescence has fused with the neural interface beyond my projections. She's rewriting the system. Is it safe?" I asked, my protective streak flaring. Mara nodded, a rare smile tugging at her lips. "More than safe, it's revolutionary. But the real test is getting her up." I turned to Lirien, catching the determination in her eyes. "You ready?" I asked, sliding an arm behind her back. She nodded, gripping my shoulder, and I lifted her gently, steadying her as she swung her new legs off the table. The first step was shaky, she wobbled, her weight leaning hard into me, but I held firm. "Easy," I said, keeping my voice low. "One at a time." She gritted her teeth, took another step, then another, her grip on me loosening as she found her balance. By the fifth step, she was standing on her own, the cybernetics humming softly, and I stepped back, watching her in awe. She wasn't just walking, she was moving, fluid and strong, like she'd been born to it. "You're doing it," I said, my voice catching. She looked up at me, her face breaking into a smile, real, unguarded, the kind that lit up the whole damn room. "I am," she said, and then she laughed, a sound so pure it hit me square in the chest. I couldn't help it, I laughed too, caught up in her joy, and for a moment, it was just us, the lab fading away. The next few days were a blur of training. I helped her adjust, walking turned to running, running turned to sparring. She stumbled plenty, crashing into me more times than I could count, but every fall made her fiercer. Her new legs weren't just tools, they were weapons, fast and precise, and she wielded them like she'd been fighting all her life. I taught her moves I'd picked up in backwater brawls, dodges, strikes, ways to use her height and speed. She soaked it up, her silver skin glowing brighter with every success, and I couldn't take my eyes off her. Nights were different. After hours of sweat and bruises, we'd collapse in the lab's cramped quarters, too wired to sleep. One evening, after she'd nailed a spinning kick that would have dropped me if I hadn't ducked, we barely made it to my cot before the tension snapped. I kissed her hard, tasting the salt on her lips, her hands digging into my back as I pulled her close. Her skin flared with light, patterns swirling in time with her gasps, and I felt every touch amplified through those damn cybernetics, electric, alive, overwhelming. We fell into each other, fierce and tender all at once, her new legs tangling with mine like they'd always belonged there. The room pulsed with her glow, a private galaxy of silver and heat, and when we finally lay still, her head on my chest, I traced the lines of light on her skin, marveling at how perfectly she fit against me. "I never thought I'd feel this," she murmured, her voice soft against my heartbeat. "Whole. Strong." I kissed her forehead, my throat tight. "You always were. Now everyone else can see it." Our moment broke when Mara's voice crackled over the intercom the next morning. "If you two are done with your little experiment, I've got news." I groaned, rolling out of bed as Lirien smirked, pulling on her gear. We found Mara in the lab, surrounded by holoscreens showing Lirien's neural patterns. "The integration's evolving," she said, her organic eye gleaming with excitement. "Her bioluminescence isn't just powering the legs, it's enhancing them. Reaction times are off the charts." "Any risks?" I asked, my hand resting on Lirien's shoulder. "None," Mara said. "It's perfect. Her body's making the tech its own." Lirien tested it, a quick spin, a kick that left a trail of light in the air, faster than I could track. "Show off," I teased, but pride swelled in my chest. She grinned, her skin flushing a deeper silver. "You love it." Mara cleared her throat, cutting through our banter. "There's more. Her biochemistry's shifting, specifically her reproductive system. It's adapting to human patterns." I froze, the words sinking in slow. Lirien's hand went to her stomach, her glow flickering with complex swirls. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice tight. Mara's smile softened. "It means your connection isn't just physical. It's rewriting what's possible. Cross-species reproduction, it's happening." I looked at Lirien, my mind racing. Kids. With her. We hadn't talked about that, hell, I hadn't even thought it was an option. "You've been feeling off, haven't you?" Mara pressed. Lirien nodded, slow, her eyes wide. "More sensitive. Tired." I took her hand, grounding myself as much as her. "We don't have to figure this out now," I said, my voice steady despite the storm in my head. "But it's good to know." She squeezed my hand back, her glow settling into a warm pulse. "Yeah," she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Options." That night, we didn't rush into anything, just lay together, her head on my shoulder, my fingers tracing her skin as we talked. "I want this," she said after a while, her voice firm. "With you. If it's real." I pulled her closer, my heart thudding. "It's real. I'm not going anywhere." Sleep came easier than it had in weeks, her warmth anchoring me. But when I woke, reality hit hard. She was pregnant. Mara confirmed it later that day. Twins, growing fast, their tiny biolights already flickering in scans. I stood there, staring at the hollow image, a mix of terror and awe churning in my gut. Lirien leaned into me, her new legs steady under her, and I wrapped an arm around her, feeling the weight of it all. I'd drifted through the galaxy alone for years, no ties, no roots. Now I had her, stronger than I'd ever dreamed, and a family on the way. It scared the hell out of me, but it felt right, like a piece I hadn't known was missing. "We'll need to fix the ship," I said, half to myself. "Get off this rock." She nodded, her eyes blazing with purpose. "And then we go back. I want my father to see what I've become." I grinned, kissing her temple. "He won't know what hit him. Whatever came next, Xylaris, Valdor, or the stars themselves, I'd face it with her. She wasn't just my partner now. She was my everything." Chapter 6, Confrontation and Legacy. I gripped the controls of Stellar Wraith as we broke through Zorynth's atmosphere, the crystal spires of the royal palace glinting like jagged teeth against the violet sky. Lirien stood beside me on the bridge, her cybernetic legs glowing faintly, her silver skin shimmering with quiet strength. Her belly was rounded now, carrying our twins, two impossible lives that had turned my world upside down. She'd insisted we come back, her voice fierce when she'd said it. "I want my father to see me, not the broken thing he threw away, but what I've become." I couldn't argue with that fire in her eyes, so here we were, barreling toward a reckoning. The ship was patched up, thanks to Mara's tech and some Valdor scrap, but it still groaned under the strain of re-entry. I glanced at Lirien, her hands steady on the co-pilot's console, and felt a surge of pride. "Ready to shake his world?" I asked, smirking. She met my gaze, her emerald eyes blazing. "More than ready." She tapped the comms, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "Father, your discarded daughter has returned. And I bring proof that strength isn't what you think." The response was instant. An honor guard of sleek fighters escorted us to the royal landing pad, their engines humming a tense welcome. I set Stellar Wraith down with a thud, the ramp hissing open, and we stepped out together. Lirien moved first, her cybernetic legs carrying her with a grace that silenced the crowd gathering below. I stayed close, my hand brushing hers, feeling the weight of every eye on us, soldiers, nobles, servants, all gaping at the woman they'd once dismissed. She was a vision, tall, unyielding, her pregnancy visible under the fitted tunic Mara had rigged for her, her skin pulsing with soft light that matched the twins' faint glow within. I'd seen her transform over months, from the angry princess in a hover chair to this warrior who'd claimed her power, and damn if it didn't make my chest ache with something fierce. We marched up the crystal steps, the air thick with whispers, until we faced the grand hall where it all began. King Xylaris sat on his throne, his pearlescent skin catching the light, his long eyes narrowing as we approached. The sneer I remembered was still there, but it faltered when he saw Lirien, really saw her. She stopped a few paces from him, her legs leaving faint trails of light on the floor, and I stood beside her, my hand resting on my pistol, just in case. "Hello, Father," she said, her voice echoing through the hall. "I've come to thank you." "Thank me?" he sputtered, leaning forward, clearly thrown. I could see the gears turning in his head, trying to reconcile the daughter he'd mocked with the woman before him. "Yes," she said, stepping closer, her glow intensifying. "By giving me away, you set me free. I found my strength, real strength, in the hands of someone who saw me as whole." She turned to me, her light flaring brighter when our eyes met, and I felt my throat tighten. Xylaris's gaze flicked to me, then back to her, taking in her cybernetic legs, her warrior stance, the swell of her belly. "You're carrying," he started, his voice faltering as the truth hit him. My grandchildren, she finished, her hand resting on her stomach. Proof that limitations are a lie. These children, born of human grit and Zorinthian grace, will grow in a body you deemed worthless. A body capable of miracles. The hall went dead silent, the weight of her words sinking in. I stepped forward, my voice low but firm. You tossed her aside like trash, Xylaris. Now look at her. She's more than you'll ever be. His face twisted, anger, shock, maybe a flicker of shame, but he didn't speak. For the first time, the king had no snide comeback, no cruel jab. Lirien had stripped him bare, and I'd never been prouder. We didn't stay long, just enough to let the crowd see, to let the story spread. As we walked back to the ship, her hand in mine, I felt the shift in the air. She wasn't just a princess anymore, she was a symbol, a spark that'd light up the galaxy. We lifted off, leaving Zorynth behind, and I knew that moment would echo far beyond those crystal walls. 6 months later, I stood in Stellar Wraith's med bay, my hands trembling as I held Lirien's. She gripped me tight, her silver skin blazing with light as she pushed through the final moments of labor. Mara's voice guided us over the comms, she'd sent us off with gear and scans, but this was our fight now. You've got this, I whispered, brushing sweat-soaked hair from her face. She nodded, fierce even in pain, and with one last cry, the twins came into the world. Lyra and Zane, our daughter and son, tiny and perfect, their skin shimmering with the same bioluminescence as their mother's, their cries strong like their father's stubborn streak. I cut the cords with shaking hands, passing them to Lirien, and watched her glow soften as she cradled them. Look at them, she said, her voice breaking with awe. I did, and my chest felt too full to breathe, 2 lives born from us, from a chance I'd never seen coming. Mara's scans had been right, they weren't just human or Zorinthian, but something new, their biolights pulsing in sync with Lirien's cybernetics. They'll be strong, I said, resting my forehead against hers, our twins nestled between us. Like their mother. She smiled, tired but radiant. And stubborn, like their father. We drifted through the stars after that, Stellar Wraith humming beneath us, a family forged in fire and light. I taught Lyra and Zane as they grew, how to fight, how to fix a ship, how to never let anyone tell them they're less than they are. Lirien showed them their heritage, her cybernetic legs a testament to what will and love could build. They'd stumble into the bridge, giggling, their skin glowing when they hugged us, and I'd catch Lirien's eye, knowing we'd made something unbreakable. Years later, word trickled back, tales of the broken princess, who defied her king, whose children lit up the dark with their strength. Xylaris faded into obscurity, his throne a relic, while Lirien's name became a beacon for anyone who'd ever been cast aside. I'd watch her with the twins, her legs gleaming as she chased them through the ship, and marvel at how far we'd come. She'd catch me staring, tease me with that smirk I loved, and I'd pull her close, feeling her light against my skin. I'd spent my life drifting, a lone gun dodging the galaxy's worst. Then Lirien crashed into me, literally, and showed me what strength really was. Not perfection, not power, but the guts to rise from the wreckage and claim what's yours. Our kids, Lyra and Zane, were proof of that, living stars born from 2 souls who'd refused to break. As I stood on the bridge one night, Lirien beside me, the twins asleep in their bunks, I knew this was my legacy, a family that turned worthless into infinite. And so, we've roared through the blazing orbit of Zorynth, from Kael Draven's gritty deal with a venomous king, claiming Lirien as a discarded relic, through hyperspace wrecks and a cybernetic phoenix rising, to a defiant showdown that shattered Xylaris' throne, crowned by the radiant birth of twins Lyra and Zane, whose shimmering lives torched a new dawn across the cosmos. If this epic scorched your soul and set your pulse racing, keep the fire roaring, drop a like and subscribe to Rocket Sci-Fi Nebula to 1,000 subs. Your passion is the supernova that lights our path, and we're thrilled to ride this interstellar wave with you. Until the next galactic blaze, burn bright and fearless.